Minorities have played a big part in the history of the United States. The whole country was based off the groups of minorities combining together and forgetting their differences to form one stronger and more uniform group. As these groups intermingled, the minorities then turned into the majority, the Americans. Over the decades, more groups migrated into the United States, two of these groups being the Africans and the Mexicans, along with the rest of the Latin Americans. These two groups were discriminated against greatly throughout the history of the United States. One very important era in which the minorities were harassed in the United States was during World War I. These two groups were maltreated within the military and at home by the majority. This shows that the United States was not in a total war because they would have set apart their differences against the common evil. Unfortunately, this did not occur, and the minorities were made fun at, discriminated against, and harassed. The first and most important place the minorities were discriminated against was in the military. It was the most important place because it was during a world war. So the first problem with the military was that once a minority inscribed or was called into the military, they were immediately placed in their own divisions separate from other groups of races. The African Americans with the African Americans, the Latinos with the Latinos, and etc. If they were not placed in a division with their own race, they would be placed with Americans, where the Americans would make fun of them. The second main thing in which they were discriminated against was the power. The minorities did not reach up higher than an officer. Also, the minorities never commanded over any white men. If an African American was an officer, then he would only command other African Americans. The military was very segregated. Even in the battlefield, segregation reigned on the American side. Most soldiers sent on the American side were white. The minorities were only sent out as meat shields, essentially. They were sent into suicide missions. The squads sent out in these missions did their job correctly and efficiently, knowing it was their only chance to impress higher officials. If not sent out, then these groups would be kept training until the war passed. During the course of the war, everybody was enthusiastic about going to war. All men able to go were immediately signed up to serve their country in the First World War. Most people sent to the front lines were white males from the ages of 18 to 25. But what nobody truly looks at back in history was what was left behind by these young boys heading off to war. What was left over was jobs, empty spaces, and a whole lot of material that needed to be made into ammunition. This is where minorities came into play. At this time, minorities were the last choice for a job. If a job were between a white man and a black man, the white man would always get first priority. But when World War I started, this created a huge opportunity for minority workers. Before, they wouldn't have a chance to get a job in a factory or other working place. But now, because all the white men had gone off to war, there were plenty of open jobs and minorities were there to fill them. Owners of businesses had no other options but to hire minority workers. Minorities helped to build a lot of the supplies made in the factories for World War I. They helped to fuel the U.S. war machine. The boom of minority workers didn't come without problems, though. When minorities were hired, it was usually at decreased pay or at horrible working hours, like late at night or early in the morning. As well, minority workers were looked down upon by white workers and usually discriminated against for being a minority. If there was a tedious or annoying job that needed to be done, minorities were forced to do it. The United States was not a single body during the First World War. It still had many problems with discrimination and public policy. Not everybody was fighting the same war. White men were fighting a war on the front lines, while minorities were fighting a social war for equality. Until these differences were solved, the U.S. could not be in total agreement and could not be in total war.